He laughed across the boardroom table. "You're the final mistake he left behind." Lorraine Hale, co-founder and widow, didn't flinch. By morning, his name vanished from the deed, the trust, and every board vote he once abused. She'd built Hale and Sons from blueprint to rooftop. Now she was reclaiming the ground. And when he reached for what he thought was legacy, the paperwork shut the door. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The laugh echoed across the polished oak of the boardroom table like a cough in a funeral parlor. Darren didn't even try to hide it. He leaned back in his chair, suit too sharp for the slack arrogance in his posture, and said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're the final mistake he left behind." The words hit Lorraine like wind across a canyon, not because they surprised her, but because of how confidently he delivered them. She didn't flinch, didn't look up, just gently placed the company binder she'd been reviewing back on the table, closed it with quiet finality, and stood. No rebuttal, no raised voice, just the steady clack of her heels across the tile as she left the room, her silence heavier than any argument. Out in the hallway, she didn't head for the elevator. She turned left toward the archive room, the one that hadn't been touched since Calvin's funeral. The air inside was stale with time and toner. She reached for the top drawer of the metal filing cabinet, pulled, and let her fingers graze across the edges of the papers until she found it. The original company charter. Hale and Sons Construction, established in 1981, co-signed by Calvin Hale and Lorraine Hale. She ran her thumb over the signature lines, then flipped to the amendment page, the one Calvin had drafted but never filed, the one Darren probably assumed had gone through. It hadn't. She had never signed away her executive voting power. Calvin had never forced the issue. Even at his most stubborn, he had known where the bedrock lay. She still held 51%, the majority. Lorraine stepped back from the cabinet, shut the drawer softly, and pulled her phone from her handbag. She hadn't used the number in years, but she still remembered it by heart. "Rhonda," she said when the voice answered. "It's Lorraine Hale. I need an appointment with Jeffrey tomorrow." "Yes," the business attorney. A pause. "No, not for Darren, for me." Back at home, she laid the charter on her dining room table like an old blueprint. She poured a glass of wine. Not celebratory, not yet, just to steady her hands. The late afternoon sun filtered through the dining room blinds, slicing the document into ribbons of memory and power. Lorraine didn't smile, but she felt something deeper, a hum in her chest, like distant thunder before a storm. She remembered the first building they'd put up. Not Darren, not Amanda, not even Calvin's brothers, just her and Calvin. Two hard-headed kids with calloused hands and a borrowed cement mixer. She'd laid the rebar herself, smeared with sweat and summer dust. That foundation still held. Darren hadn't touched a beam. She opened her laptop and logged into the internal company system. It took 3 password resets, a tech support email, and a grim chuckle when she finally got in, but there it was. The board directory, the financials, the executive voting schedule. He thought she was ornamental. She highlighted her name in the digital org chart and clicked primary. The system flashed green. Change accepted. Lorraine closed the laptop slowly, savoring the click of the lid like the shutting of a vault. The next morning, she walked into her lawyer's office wearing her old 10 overcoat, the one Calvin used to call her no-nonsense armor. Her hair was up, pinned with the silver comb Amanda gave her 15 years ago, back when birthdays were still warm. Jeffrey stood as she entered, startled. "Lorraine, didn't think I'd see you until next tax season." "Life's funny like that," she said. "Pull up the charter." He blinked, then did as told. Within minutes, his brows lifted. "You still have controlling interest. Not by accident. And you want to use it now." She took a breath. "He's been trying to build on sand. I intend to reintroduce concrete." Jeffrey leaned forward, suddenly focused. "We can file an internal motion, strip his voting privileges, force a reevaluation of board roles." Lorraine folded her hands. "And if he wants to throw a tantrum, let him. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to clean." Later that afternoon, she stood in the company's main hallway, looking up at the gleaming sign that read, Hale and Sons. She reached into her coat pocket, phone to ear, and said 3 words without blinking. It's time I remind him who built this place. Lorraine slid the binder across the smooth walnut table, the soft scratch of leather against wood breaking the otherwise loaded silence. Across from her, Edgar Hallow adjusted his glasses, fingers pausing at the corner of the charter before he opened it. The room was still like a storm, waiting to choose its direction. Well, I'll be damned, he murmured, scanning the signature page. You never signed the transition clause. I watched Calvin draw it up, Lorraine said calmly. Watched him put the pen down and walk away. He had second thoughts. Edgar leaned back in the chair, exhaling. The light through the office window cut a streak across his desk, landing on the photo of him and Calvin taken 20 years ago at a ribbon cutting. Edgar tapped it once, almost unconsciously. Darren's going to lose his mind when he realizes you've still got the reins. Lorraine crossed her legs slowly, like she had all the time in the world. He already lost his mind. Now he's about to lose the illusion that he ever had mine. Edgar gave a dry chuckle, but his tone dropped. He's reckless, Lorraine. Spoiled, mean when he's cornered. This will get loud. She met his gaze, not blinking. Then I'll stay quiet and let the paperwork speak for me. An hour later, they moved to the conference room where Edgar had already stacked 3 thick folders of financial records. Lorraine pulled on a pair of thin gloves, an old habit, and started flipping through them with meticulous care. Her fingers paused on a wire transfer from the Hale Family Trust. $42,000 labeled client acquisition. She raised a brow. Startup called Hale Hub, Edgar explained, already pulling a second sheet. Supposed to be a tech platform for contractors. He pitched it last year. It folded within 4 months. On trust money, every dollar. Lorraine nodded once, adding the document to a fresh folder labeled Irregular Disbursements. Her movements were quiet, deliberate. Her silence was louder than a lecture. Edgar slid over printout. Also found 2 vendor payments marked consulting. Names don't show up in our approved list. He's bleeding this place dry behind a smirk. Lorraine picked up a pen and added both names to a lined legal pad and inked the color of dried blood. Then she reached into her purse, removed an envelope, and handed it to Edgar. My letter of intent, she said. Effective immediately. I'm filing a motion to suspend Darren's voting privileges until a formal ethics review is complete. Edgar blinked. That's going to ignite a war number, she stood, gathering the documents into her leather portfolio. That's going to reintroduce discipline. Back at home, she poured herself a cup of chamomile and stood in the sunroom overlooking the back lawn. It was quiet there, but her mind wasn't. Darren had called her a mistake. He'd worn her husband's name like armor and used her silence like permission. But silence wasn't surrender. It was calculation. And she had calculated long enough. The fax machine in her home office, a dusty relic Calvin insisted they never replace, sputtered to life as Edgar transmitted the first confirmation form. Lorraine walked toward the sound slowly, the hum and whine of the machine as familiar as a morning kettle. She picked up the sheet, scanned the heading, Notice of Motion, Executive Role Suspension, Darren Hale, and placed it inside a blue folder marked Personal Copies. The portraits came down before sunrise. Lorraine stood in the echo of the empty lobby as the janitor unscrewed the final brass plaque. Darren's face, grinning beside Calvin's, landed face down on the polished wood desk like a verdict. Lorraine didn't flinch. She was already unrolling the replacements. Each photograph she lifted from the cardboard sleeve told a different story, not of suits and ribbon cuttings, but of grit and calloused hands. There was Alma Jenkins, helmet askew, grinning through a concrete pour in '84. Next to her, Leroy Jameson balanced on the skeletal frame of their first build. The black and white shot of Lorraine herself, 29, steel-toed boots, jeans covered in dust, showed her holding blueprints over her knee like a general charting battle. By 7:30 a.m., the wall no longer told the story of 2 men in a dynasty. It spoke of crews, sweat, scaffolds, and the people who built Hale and Sons. They just inherited it. The receptionist, a young woman named Carla, froze when she walked in. Mrs. Hale wasn't told there was a gallery update. Lorraine turned from the final frame. "Now you are." Carla's eyes scanned the wall. She stepped closer to Alma's photo and smiled. "My uncle used to talk about her. Said she ran circles around the site foreman." Lorraine allowed a thin smile. She did. By 9 a.m., whispers were circulating. Staff stood in quiet clusters near the break room, stealing glances at the wall every time someone walked by. Some nodded in respect. A few looked visibly moved. Not one person asked where Darren's photo had gone. It didn't take long for Darren to arrive. His dress shoes clicked like hammer strikes down the marble corridor. "What the hell is this?" he barked, the words cracking against the open-air atrium as he stormed into the lobby. Lorraine didn't turn from the frame, she was leveling. "Is this some kind of joke?" Darren continued. "You took down my picture, Grandpa's?" She turned then, clipboard in hand, and offered him a single sheet of paper. The updated organizational chart hot off the printer. At the top, Lorraine Hale, Executive Chair, Voting Majority. His name had been moved down. Non-voting member, advisory only. Darren's face reddened. "You think this erases me?" "Legacy," Lorraine said quietly, "isn't about who poses, it's about who showed up." He threw the sheet onto the floor. "This is his company. You think plastering up a few drywall jockeys changes that?" Lorraine lifted her chin. "It's our company. Calvin and I co-founded it. You just showed up for the photographs." Darren looked around as if waiting for anyone, to stand beside him. No one did. Edgar, watching from the mezzanine above, raised a single brow and said nothing. "You'll regret this," Darren hissed, jabbing a finger toward her. "This won't stand." Lorraine stepped forward. Her heels clicked softly, measured. "Then sit down and read the bylaws, or better yet, have someone read them to you." Darren shoved through the front doors, nearly knocking over a delivery man on his way in. By noon, an envelope was delivered to his office upstairs. Thick ivory paper. Lorraine's letterhead at the top. Subject: Formal notification of executive role adjustment. Enclosed: documentation of her voting authority, the trust's governing terms, and the board's upcoming emergency meeting agenda. Darren slammed the envelope on his desk, sending a coaster flying. The document slid open slightly, revealing the first line. "As of this date, all executive privileges afforded to Darren Hale are under formal review for suspension." He stared at the words for a long moment, the only sound in the room, the creak of his leather chair as he leaned back and the rising hum of panic in his throat. The smell of ink and dust lingered like memory as Lorraine pulled open the bottom drawer of her late husband's desk. Inside was the thick leather-bound ledger Calvin had refused to digitize. He used to joke that some things were meant to be written in ink, especially when men had a habit of rewriting things in pixels. She hadn't touched it in years. The pages creaked as she opened it, the spine stiff with time. Each line was a thread in the company's real history, handwritten notes beside job site addresses, payroll logs from the 80s, quietly tracked donations Calvin had made to injured workers' families. Lorraine remembered most of it, but not all, and certainly not what she found on the final few pages. A bank transfer logged under the Hale Foundation's discretionary account dated 18 months ago, $175,000. Not unusual at a glance until she saw the payee. Bridge AX Venture LLC, a tech incubator, Darren's passion project, a platform he'd claimed would modernize contracting compliance. The startup had folded within 6 months. Lorraine traced her finger under the memo line Calvin had always insisted on. Purpose: Educational Youth Fund Code 7. She felt her jaw harden. He'd reclassified a grant for low-income student apprenticeships to fund a failed app. She buzzed Edgar's office. "Bring the red folder and a fresh witness form." 10 minutes later, Edgar stepped into her office. "No coffee, no pleasantries." He saw the ledger open on the desk and sat down slowly. "This is what I was worried about," he said, already pulling up the foundation account on his tablet. "It's worse," Lorraine murmured. "He didn't just misuse the funds, he erased their origin." Look, she pointed to the foundation memo, then to her own notes from a board meeting 2 years ago. Darren had presented the grant as unused, claiming the youth apprenticeship partner had dissolved. Eli. Edgar's lips thinned. Do you want this escalated? Lorraine leaned back, fingers still resting on the corner of Calvin's handwriting. I want it rewritten accurately, and I want Darren erased from what he never earned. By afternoon, Edgar had compiled the formal documentation, cross-referenced financials, foundation board minutes, and third-party banking records. Lorraine reviewed them with the same precision she used to measure foundation spacing on blueprints. Start with a full revocation of his foundation grant access, she said. Effective immediately. He hesitated. He's going to notice. I want him to, Lorraine replied. Her tone was crisp but calm, like the air just before thunder. She logged into the foundation admin panel herself. Her fingers moved with methodical precision. In less than 2 minutes, Darren's user profile was deleted. No access, no title, no digital trail, just a blank where his name used to sit. That night, the sky turned an angry slate gray over Greenville. Lorraine sat on the back porch with a glass of unsweetened tea, watching the storm crawl in. It felt fitting. Her phone vibrated against the side table. A soft ping, then another. She picked it up and saw Darren's name flash across the lock screen. One new email. Subject line. What the hell did you do? She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Inside Darren's downtown condo, the glow of his laptop screen cast harsh shadows across his face as the notification flashed again. Denied. Hale Foundation Admin Portal. Error code. Revoked by owner. He sat frozen. Then, for the first time in months, maybe years, he realized he didn't know who exactly was still pulling the levers behind his last name. The next day, rain tapped the boardroom windows like a ticking clock. Each drop was another reminder that time and patience were running out. Lorraine stood at the head of the long mahogany table, her posture carved from decades of grit and grace. Across from her, Darren slouched in his leather chair, legs sprawled out in a posture he thought read confident, but reeked of inherited arrogance. He hadn't spoken yet. That would come, but for now, he smirked that same sideways smirk Calvin used to wear when betting he'd win a deal before, even shaking hands. The bloodline didn't skip expression. Only integrity. Lorraine's voice was quiet, but surgical. This emergency meeting is called under Section 12.4 of the Hale and Sons bylaws. Misuse of fiduciary privilege and demonstrable damage to foundation partnerships. Darren chuckled. This is cute. Is there going to be a PowerPoint? She didn't blink. Edgar stood and handed out printed packets to each board member. There are no slides, Edgar said. Just records, wire transfers, reclassified grants, missed quarterly reports, all traced back to your digital credentials, Darren. Murmurs rippled down the table. Lorraine allowed the silence to breathe long enough for discomfort to do its work. She opened her own folder and tapped a photo. This is an at-risk student named Elijah Ramos. He was meant to receive an apprenticeship through the Hale Foundation's equity program. That opportunity vanished when funds were diverted without board approval to bridge Apex Venture, a company that no longer exists. Darren's jaw tightened. That was R&D. No, Lorraine replied, steel threaded through silk. That was embezzlement dressed up as ambition. Edgar cleared his throat. I've reviewed the charter. Under Clause 3.2, any board member who causes reputational harm, misuses foundation resources, or violates fiduciary duties can have their voting status revoked by majority. Darren scoffed. You're bluffing. Lorraine slid a ballot toward him. Then vote, Darren. Let's see if your belief in the system goes both ways. He stared down at the paper. For a second, just a flicker, he hesitated, not because he doubted his own cleverness, but because something in Lorraine's stillness unsettled him. It was the same quiet she'd worn when Calvin had first told her they weren't ready to hire women on job sites, and she went out and got licensed as a contractor. The next week, the board voted. Lorraine, yes. Edgar, yes. Denise from marketing, yes. Samuel from HR, yes. Martin, longtime project manager, yes. Linda from Site Logistics, yes. 3 others mumbled, no, but didn't make eye contact with her or Darren. Final count, 6-3. Edgar nodded, voice low and even. Motion passes. Darren Hale is formally stripped of voting privileges. Effective immediately. A pause. Then Lorraine leaned forward, folding her hands on the table. You may own a name, she said, eyes locked on Darren, but not a seat at this table. He shoved back his chair hard enough that it scraped against the polished floor. This is what you want, he snapped. To erase him? Lorraine rose slowly, gathering the documents into a clean stack. No, she replied. Just you. Darren stormed out of the boardroom, his footsteps echoing down the hall. At the far end, the framed photo of Calvin and Darren still hung, grandfather and grandson, smiling in hard hats. By the next morning, that photo would be gone. With the board's vote, Lorraine had not only stripped Darren of his official power, she had begun the deeper unraveling, separating his image from Calvin's legacy and reclaiming the truth from the shadow of inheritance. The weeds curled along the base of the old brick building like time trying to reclaim. Lorraine stepped out of her car, letting the gravel crunch beneath her low heels, and looked up at the structure that still bore her and Calvin's fingerprints, though no plaque had ever said so. The air smelled of wet soil and faintly of mildew, age without rot, like old memories tucked in a cedar chest. She walked slowly toward the foundation, one hand trailing along the faded brick. Her breath fogged a little in the crisp Greenville morning, but her grip on her cane remained steady. The cornerstone was right where she remembered, lower left edge, near the alley side, half concealed by creeping ivy. She bent down slow, deliberate, and brushed it away with gloved fingers etched into the granite slab. CH plus LH 1981. Still clear, still theirs. She stood there longer than she meant to. The chill crept through her coat, but she didn't move. Not yet. This was the first building Hale and Sons had ever touched back when Sons was a hopeful plural and not a legacy myth. Lorraine had been 6 months into grieving her own mother when they laid the foundation here. Calvin had chiseled his initials into the stone that morning, then paused, handed her the hammer, and said, "Your hands built this, too." She added hers in silence. And just last year, Darren had proposed a teardown, flattening the site for luxury urban condos. The phrase alone had made Lorraine feel like her lungs were packed in styrofoam. By noon, she was in the city planning office, seated across from a clerk whose eyebrows rose as soon as she slid the paperwork forward. "You're requesting historical status for 100 Grayson Street?" he asked, flipping through the pages. "I'm not requesting," Lorraine said. "I'm preserving." The clerk looked up. "Are you the current title holder?" "I'm the original one." Within 3 weeks, her petition moved through committee. Edgar helped streamline records, cite photos, original permits, payroll ledgers with her handwriting still in the margins. One included a note: lunch delivery for team paid by LH. The city approved the landmark designation unanimously. When the official letter arrived, Lorraine didn't frame it. She folded it into her leather journal, the same one she'd once used to track their first 10 projects. She didn't need to display proof. The building was proof enough. That same week, Darren's phone rang unanswered 12 times. The developer he'd courted, an out-of-state firm hungry for Southern revitalization, had caught wind of the new designation through local news coverage. Backlash came swift. Former employees, city preservationists, even a few local college students began posting photos of the cornerstone. Hashtags followed. Hashtag built by Hale. Hashtag not just Sons. Hashtag she was there too. The condo deal crumbled within a week. The developer released a vague statement citing new zoning complications. Darren released nothing. Lorraine walked the perimeter of the site one last time before sunset. A light drizzle began to fall, catching on her hair. She didn't flinch. She ran her hand over the cornerstone again, feeling the deep cuts of her own initials. LH. This wasn't nostalgia. This was reclamation. The next morning, as she sipped her coffee on the sun porch, Edgar forwarded her a brief email with a clipped subject line: "Deal terminated. Grayson site withdrawn." Below it, a single sentence from the developer. Please remove us from future discussions. We were not informed of the pending landmark status. Lorraine smiled. Darren's side project was officially dead, and the cornerstone remained exactly where it had always been, beneath her name, not his. Lorraine stood over the mahogany table in the Hale Family Foundation's boardroom, flipping through line items like they were old bones. Each number told a story, and Darren's told the wrong one. $40,000 to a VR home staging app that never launched, $18,500 to a consulting group with no physical address, $75,000 to branding development that somehow resulted in 2 half-built websites and a yacht rental listed under event planning. She tapped her pen once firmly against the glass table. Enough. The next day, she summoned Edgar and 2 foundation board members to the corner office Calvin once used for grant planning. Lorraine hadn't been in the room since before his passing. It still smelled faintly of cigar ash and leather polish, and the high windows hummed with summer heat. Redirect every uncommitted fund, she said flatly, hands folded. I want to go into actual roofs, not rooftops. Edgar raised an eyebrow. The home ownership initiative and down payment matching? She nodded. No tech, no branding fluff, no more Darren Vision grants. I want families, first-time owners, single parents, people who know what it means to build something and stay. 2 weeks later, the foundation's new programming launched with a low-profile announcement in the Greenville Ledger, but low didn't last. A week after that, the paper ran a full Sunday feature. Matriarch takes back the mission. Hale Foundation returns to its roots. It showed Lorraine standing in front of the original 1981 project site, one hand on the cornerstone, the other gripping a grant check for a young couple buying their first home behind her. Edgar beamed. The couple looked stunned. Lorraine looked like a woman who'd done this before, because she had. Darren didn't take it quietly. He exploded on social media, blasting Lorraine as out of touch, sentimental, and threatened by innovation. He posted photos from his last tech launch, half empty as it had been, and tagged 3 journalists. What he didn't count on was the public response. One comment read, "Imagine getting humbled by your grandmother in public and still thinking you're the visionary." Another said, "She built homes. You built a vaporware app. Sit down, Darren." The replies kept coming, each one sharper than the last. Lorraine was reading them in the morning sun, sipping coffee in her kitchen when Amanda's name lit up on her phone screen. She debated letting it ring, then pressed answer. "Mom," Amanda began, voice tight. "You've embarrassed him." Lorraine stirred her spoon gently in her cup. "He embarrassed himself." There was a long pause on the line. No defense, just breath. "He says you're trying to erase him." "I'm not trying," Lorraine replied. "I am." That afternoon, she returned to the foundation office to find an envelope on her desk. Inside, a single sheet of paper, formal letterhead at the top. Motion. Transfer of full governance authority. Recipient, Lorraine Hale, signed unanimously by the board underneath. In recognition of your foundational service and restored vision, the board moves to grant full operational and executive control to Miss Hale, effective immediately. There was a time Lorraine would have let it slide. The plaque, the photo, the phrase "founded by Calvin Hale," etched in stone and website code alike. But silence, she'd learned, was just another tool for rewriting history. And this time, the story was hers to tell. She clicked edit at the top of the company's legacy webpage and stared down the line that had followed her name like a shadow for decades. Founded by Calvin Hale, 1981. She deleted it. Her fingers hovered briefly before she typed. Co-founded by Calvin and Lorraine Hale, 1981. No flourish, no fanfare, just the truth at last. Next, she uploaded a photograph dug from the back of a steel filing cabinet, one Darren had never bothered to look through. In it, a much younger Lorraine stood on the unfinished deck of their very first home build. Hard hat crooked, smile unguarded, a clipboard in one hand and a nail gun in the other. Her jeans were muddy to the knee. Behind her, Calvin and 2 crewmen held up the framing. She'd taken the photo herself on a self-timer. It wasn't glossy, but it was real. By noon, the new site was live. By 2 p.m., the staff email was out. Subject: Our origin story. Body: We believe every foundation must rest on full truth. Today, we updated ours. We honor those who showed up, those who stayed, those who built. LH. Within an hour, Lorraine received her first reply from Brenda in HR. Thank you. My mother worked on that first build. She remembered you bringing lunch for the whole crew. Then Edgar: Took us long enough. Even site manager Jim, who'd barely nodded to Lorraine in years, wrote, I always wondered why you weren't on the wall. The silence finally broke at 5:17 p.m. when Darren stormed through the office lobby, jaw clenched, phone in hand. He barged into Edgar's office, ignoring the closed door. This is revisionist history, he snapped, waving his screen. She's rewriting the legacy. Edgar didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Then, maybe it's time you revised your resume. Darren blinked. You think this is funny? No, Edgar said evenly. But I do think it's accurate. Lorraine stood in the hallway outside, arms crossed, listening. She didn't need to say anything. The walls were finally talking for her. Later that evening, back in her study, she was reading emails when a new one came through with a subject line that gave her pause. Greenville Builders Summit Keynote Invitation. The message was short, formal. We'd be honored if you would speak at this year's summit. Your leadership and advocacy have reshaped not only Hale & Sons, but how we think about legacy in our field. At the bottom, theme. Who built this place? Lorraine stared at it for a long moment, the cursor blinking beside the reply button. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves just enough to sound like the past shifting. The legal threat arrived by courier, sharp and thin like a paper dagger. Darren's name stamped in bold at the top. The usual legalese dressed up as intimidation. Cease and desist from defamatory commentary regarding company legacy. Lorraine didn't flinch. She folded the document cleanly in half and tucked it under the strap of her handbag right next to her printed keynote. Her car was already waiting. By the time she arrived at the Greenville Civic Center, the air buzzed with sawdust-scented cologne and contractor boots clapping on polished concrete. Over 300 builders, architects, foundation heads, and city reps filled the high-ceiling hall. It smelled of burnt coffee and new lumber, of growth and grit. Her name was last on the program. Keynote: Lorraine Hale, Hale & Sons Construction. She took the stage in slacks and a navy blouse. No jewelry but her wedding band and a pin that read 1981 behind her. The screen lit up with the words, Legacy means leaving space for others. She adjusted the mic once, then rested her hands on either side of the podium. When I helped pour the first concrete slab for Hale & Sons, she began, voice low but steady. No one handed me a ribbon or took my picture. She paused. They gave me a broom. Laughter quick, soft, but real. I swept floors on sites I helped fund, carried permits through downtown rainstorms. I delivered lunches, poured coffee, picked out siding, and checked invoices. And for 40 years, I did it in the shadow of a name that was only half the story. She moved her hand to the clicker. The screen changed. Photos began to flicker by early builds, gravel roads, workers in the South Carolina summer heat. Lorraine crouched in paint-smeared jeans beside drywall she'd taped herself. She continued, Legacy doesn't come from whose name is on the truck. It comes from the people who carried the weight when no one was looking. She turned from the podium. So today, I want to name the ones who built this with us. She read them slowly, deliberately, one by one. Bernie Long, first crew chief, who cut his honeymoon short to finish our second duplex. Mavis Daniels, who framed more houses than the city inspector knew. Rafael Cortez, James Dillard, Jaywin. Each name landed like a nail into wood. Solid, permanent, and Calvin Darren. Not a breath of mention. When she ended, the hall was still for 2 beats, like the air itself had stopped to listen. Then came the applause. Not a polite, we're on a schedule clap, but a rising, rolling ovation that filled the rafters. Edgar stood first, then the mayor, then even rival companies who'd once dismissed Hale & Sons as a legacy machine. Someone near the front wiped their eyes. Someone else muttered, "Finally." Backstage, a young builder approached her, hand outstretched. "You just gave half of us permission to stop pretending someone else built our lives." Lorraine smiled. "I didn't give it. I reclaimed it." By that night, the local papers had it front page. "Matriarch rewrites legacy and brings the house down." The speech was clipped and shared on builder forums, then civic platforms, then went semi-viral among women in construction and small business leaders. One tweet read, "Lorraine Hale just proved that legacy can evolve if the real builders take back the pen." The foundation's inbox filled with messages of support. Several corporate donors pledged new partnerships. Local history groups requested interviews. The next morning, Edgar entered Lorraine's office with a half smile and a freshly printed brochure. "They sent this down for marketing." She took it. It was the mock-up for the company's 75th anniversary campaign. Clean design, timeline, graphics, quotes from past leaders, and one very obvious omission. Darren's name was gone. Not even a footnote. She looked at Edgar. He just shrugged. They thought it better not to feature anyone whose title didn't match their contribution. Lorraine's lips barely lifted, but her eyes gleamed. No arguments here. The envelope was thick, the kind that came with glossy paper and heavier threats. Lorraine didn't bother sitting. She stood at the kitchen island, peeled it open with a corner of a butter knife, and read the top line in Darren's usual tone of entitlement, disguised as legal ease. "Cease and desist from further defamatory action against Darren Hale." There it was, the tantrum now in Times New Roman size 12. She set the letter down gently, like a napkin after a good meal. By noon, her legal team had already flagged the filing for what it was: toothless. Darren had stapled together bruised ego and shaky accusations, claiming public defamation, emotional distress, and malicious dismantling of legacy. Lorraine sat across from Edgar in the conference room, the blinds half drawn against the sun's glare. He flipped through the documentation she'd handed him. Real documentation, records, receipts, footnotes of fraud tucked under startup invoices, checks signed with Calvin's memorial fund backing a project that never passed permit phase. "Favoritism," Edgar muttered, tapping a line. He kept promoting his college roommate's company. No bid, no contract trail, and used foundation funds to do it, Lorraine added calmly. Legacy indeed. Her lead counsel, Vanessa, folded her arms. "I'll call their attorney. He's going to advise Darren to back down quietly if he's smart." Lorraine nodded once. "Let them know this is the final warning. After this, I make it public." The call happened that same afternoon. According to Vanessa, Darren's lawyer didn't even try to fight. He sighed long and tired, then said, "You do realize she's the one paying your retainer, right?" The silence on Darren's end reportedly lasted 10 full seconds. The next morning, the lawsuit was dropped. No press, no apology, just a terse line withdrawal and an email that read, "Moving on professionally." Edgar was the one who brought the printout to Lorraine's office, folded in half like a surrender flag. She smiled with her eyes. "Perfect. Let's finish the cleanup." She signed the forms to close Darren's access to the family's property accounts, the ones he'd been dipping into since college, masked under family administrative costs. The executive code was changed by noon. The new signature required hers, and hers alone. That afternoon, the company internet quietly updated. The leadership page, once a curated blend of filtered headshots and flowery bios, now looked leaner, truer. Lorraine's photo remained, sharper than before. Edgar's moved to the top right with his 40-year tenure finally labeled as such. Amanda's name appeared under foundation operations. Darren's gone.
No farewell. No explanation.
The company's calendar pinged an alert. Leadership chart updated effective immediately. At sunset, Lorraine stepped out onto her porch with a glass of lemon water and no plan but silence. The hydrangeas were full, blushing against the dusk. Her wind chimes rattled gently as cicadas hummed a low, steady drone. The knock was soft, uncertain. She turned to see Amanda standing at the edge of the porch, one hand curled around the railing like she wasn't sure she was welcome. Amanda stirred her coffee, with the end of a spoon she didn't need. Round and round, slow as regret, Rain tapped softly on the kitchen window, steady as breath. Outside, the garden Lorraine had built from scratch, hibiscus, thyme, wild violets shimmered in the mist. Inside, the silence was thicker. Lorraine sat across from her daughter, legs crossed, steady as stone. Between them lay a manila envelope with her late husband's name scribbled in pencil across the back. It had been sealed since yesterday. But this moment wasn't about Calvin. It was about the woman who finally knocked on her mother's porch. "I should have said something years ago," Amanda murmured. Her voice was flat, but her fingers trembled against the ceramic mug. Lorraine didn't answer right away. She let the moment stretch, not out of cruelty, but gravity. "You didn't," she finally said. "But you're here now." Amanda's eyes lifted. "I was afraid to challenge him." "You never were." A breath caught in Lorraine's chest. It wasn't pride. It was history, deep and weary. "I challenged him because someone had to," she said softly. "I wasn't fearless. I was tired of watching men decide what I was allowed to build." Amanda blinked back something unshed. "And Darren, I saw it happening." The way he'd echo Calvin's tone, his posture, like legacy, was inheritance instead of effort. "Legacy without labor is just a costume," Lorraine said, cool and even. Amanda nodded, as if the words struck something deeper than guilt. She reached for the envelope, but stopped. "You sure you want me to see it?" "No," Lorraine said plainly. "But I'm not hiding anything anymore." She pulled a second envelope from the drawer. This one was newer, cleaner. She slid it across the table. Amanda hesitated, then opened it. The new will was short and direct. Darren's name was nowhere on it. Not for the company, not for the trust, not even a gesture. Amanda's own name was listed beneath Edgar's designated family trustee, with co-signing rights on all major financial moves, not for her to hoard, but for her to steward. Amanda stared at the page, then slowly, like something melting, began to cry, but not loud and not mournful. Lorraine watched the tears, then reached for a napkin and slid it across. Amanda didn't use it. "It's not grief," Amanda whispered. "It's relief." Lorraine took a slow sip of her own coffee, letting the warmth fill the spaces the years had hollowed out. "You're still family," she said finally. "But so is the truth, and we've ignored that one longer than we should have." Amanda's mouth opened, then closed. She gave a half-laugh, half-sob. "I thought you were going to freeze me out." "You didn't freeze," Lorraine said. "You waited. That's different. But now it's your turn to act." The rain picked up. A few birds still called through it, soft and high. The room smelled of cinnamon rolls from earlier, stale now, but warm. They sat in it, not peace, not tension, something between. Amanda cleared her throat. "I've been thinking. If the foundation really is going to shift, it should have a hand still working the ground, not just standing on it." Lorraine raised an eyebrow. "That an offer or an apology?" Amanda smiled for the first time in what felt like a decade. "Both? Let me co-chair it with Edgar. With you if you want." Lorraine didn't answer right away. She stood, walked to the window, looked out at the garden, the storm softening, the soil soaking up what it needed. Then she turned back. Lorraine stood on the sidewalk across from the high-rise, her umbrella casting a narrow shadow against the early morning sun. The glass exterior of the Riverton condominiums gleamed, sterile and cold. She remembered the first time she visited the unit. Calvin still alive, Darren still tolerable, and everything still salvageable. Now she looked at it not as a gift passed down, but as a leash she'd just cut. She filed the eviction herself. The clerk at the courthouse hadn't blinked when reading the paperwork. Trust-back lease, revocable, misuse of family funds, noncompliance with financial ethics clauses, all signed by Darren months ago. Without reading the fine print, Lorraine's fine print, she had written the trust documents with a seasoned estate attorney, one who warned her, "It's never the money that causes the problem. It's who thinks they're owed it." And Darren had believed himself owed. But titles meant nothing without deeds, and Lorraine had all the deeds. By noon, Darren's outrage bled across the internet. He posted on 3 platforms, each more unhinged than the last. My grandmother is illegally evicting me from a home my grandfather built. Family doesn't mean betrayal. This is elder abuse by her against me. The comments didn't go how he'd hoped. Bro, you literally said she was a mistake. Pretty sure she co-founded the company you're whining about. Sounds like she's the legacy. You're just the residue. Lorraine didn't comment.
She didn't like.
She didn't retweet. She simply waited. By Friday, the court had upheld her revocation. A 30-day notice was posted, official seals stamped, silence from Darren until the morning he left. He came at dawn, hoodie up, face hard with rage and wounded pride. Lorraine watched from her parked car as two hired movers loaded boxes into the back of a dented rental van. No luxury SUV this time. No smug grin, just a man unspoling. He didn't look back once. Lorraine didn't wave.
She didn't speak.
She just waited until the van pulled away and stepped onto the property. The lobby still had echoes of Calvin style, polished oak trim, vintage sconces, dark carpet that muffled every footstep. But it would change soon. The rebranding was already underway. The Hale Women's Initiative, bold lettering, was stenciled in on the brass plaque beside the entrance. The building, long held in the family's private trust, would become transitional housing for displaced women in the trades, electricians, welders, single mothers finishing certifications. Not a monument to Darren's ego, but a tool for someone else's survival. Lorraine met city officials on the 4th floor, walking them through plans to convert Darren's penthouse into community rooms, resource centers, and legal clinics. They asked about funding. She pointed to her own name on the deed. Build it from the title up, she said.
Laughedyou'Re.
As they reached the elevator, one of the council aides, no older than Darren, maybe younger, gestured toward the old building directory. It still lists him here. Lorraine studied the plastic letters beside the unit number. Dale, executive consultant. She nodded once. Remove it and deactivate his access badge. The aide hesitated. Just wipe it. Lorraine pressed the elevator button, calm as ever. No, she said. Return the building to those who knew how to stay. The archive room smelled of dust and varnish, like time had soaked into the grain of every file cabinet and drawer. Lorraine stood in the doorway, keys in hand, watching sunlight streak across the glass-covered binders and blueprints, a room built to remember. But memory, she had learned, could be edited, and now must be. Darren had made his edits in arrogance. She would make hers in truth. It began with the timelines. Every printed version of Hale and Sons' history in brochures on plaques across their website painted a revisionist mural founded in 1981 by Calvin Hale, grown under his vision, expanded by his grandson, Darren. No mention of Lorraine, no names of workers, no stories of sweat. She handed the binder to a young contractor from the firm she hired, a digital preservation group that had restored history for war veterans and Black-owned business archives across the South. Strip it down, she said. Erase what was never earned. Add what was never seen. Over the next few weeks, the walls of the company's main hallway transformed. Gone were the sepia portraits of Calvin shaking hands with developers and posing beside Darren in borrowed hard hats. In their place, vibrant prints of labor crews, carpenters mid-swing, concrete workers in muddy boots, electricians wiring the first municipal library they ever built. Names were etched below each photo. Names that had never made it past payroll records. Edgar walked beside her on installation day, eyes scanning the displays. You know, he said quietly, most people would have just added their face to the wall. Lorraine looked up at a photo of 3 women in yellow safety vests grinning on a job site. She was one of them, 28, covered in drywall dust, holding a clipboard. I don't need a wall, she said. I need a mirror. This company should see who built it. The final plaque hung near the exit. It wasn't centered. That was intentional. Founded by those who stayed, preserved by those who built. No names, no pedestal, just a truth too large to sign. She filed the request with the South Carolina Office of Historic Business Recognition, an application to name herself as the sole living founder of Hale and Sons Construction. It wasn't a title she needed, but one that should have been given the day Calvin filed their articles of incorporation and left her name off the record. Within a week, the email arrived.
Approved.
Recognition effective immediately. That afternoon, while she and Edgar finalized press language, a courier arrived, pale green uniform, clipboard tucked under one arm. Delivery from Mrs. Lorraine Hale, he said. Signature required. She paused. The envelope was thick, hand-addressed, sealed with wax, Calvin's old crest stamp. Her heart slowed. The date stamped on the corner, the 14th of March, 2019, nearly 6 months before his stroke. The envelope had sat somewhere for years. The courier tilted his head. "You all right, ma'am?" Lorraine blinked once and took the package. She sat in her office, the envelope resting on her lap like a weight rediscovered. She hesitated, not out of fear, but readiness. The flap cracked open with a crisp tear. Inside, 2 folded pages. His handwriting slanted with age, but steady. The opening line stopped her cold. "Lorraine, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and something's gone wrong." Her fingers curled over the page. "I don't know what Darren will become, but I fear he believes his name means he deserves the empire. That was never the deal. You built this with me. You held it together when I wanted to quit. If he ever uses my name to erase you, I beg you, remind him whose hands built the bones of this place." Lorraine exhaled slow and tight. "Do what you must. You always did. And I was always proud, even when I was too damn stubborn to say it." No sign-off.
No apology.
Just the truth, handwritten and sealed, as if he knew one day she'd need it. The boardroom had always been too cold in the mornings. Something about the vent above the west wall made the air hum like a throat clearing that never stopped. Lorraine took her place at the head of the polished mahogany table. The soft leather of her chair creaked just once as she settled into it. 10 chairs in total, one left untouched at the far end. Darren's still gleaming, still empty.
It would stay that way.
"Let's begin," she said, her voice calm and deliberate. She didn't need to raise it. The room fell silent with a kind of reverence only earned by weathered resilience. Amanda, seated on Lorraine's left, adjusted the collar of her slate blue blouse. For once, she looked present, not just physically, but in posture and spirit. Lorraine watched her daughter closely, searching for that elusive flicker of strength she'd once feared was gone for good. Edgar, on Lorraine's right, clicked open a silver pen and began to record the minutes. Agenda Item 1. Final vote for Foundation leadership. The motion passed without a single dissent. "Effective immediately," he said, smiling at Amanda. "Mrs. Amanda Hale is elected Executive Director of the Hale Community Foundation." Applause rippled through the room, subdued but sincere. Amanda blinked hard, nodding once, emotion visible in the small tremble of her lower lip. Lorraine reached for her hand beneath the table. Their fingers brushed, and this time Amanda didn't pull away. Lorraine stood. "Before we continue, I want something noted in the permanent record." She turned slightly, her voice never wavering. "As of today, Darren Hale is officially removed from all governance roles within Hale and Sons Construction and the Hale Community Foundation." There was no shock, no audible gasps, just the scratch of Edgar's pen moving with finality. Lorraine turned toward the empty chair at the end of the table. "Let it stay there unfilled. Let it remind us what happens when ego replaces effort. When a name is mistaken for a contribution." The room held its breath. Edgar lifted his glass of sweet tea. "To builders," he said, raising it high. "Not beneficiaries." Glasses clinked, smiles broke loose. A legacy writhed. Lorraine allowed herself a rare smile. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just relief, heavy and earned. Later, as the room cleared and the board drifted out into the hall for photos and catered pie from Joyce's kitchen, Lorraine lingered. The overhead light buzzed faintly. Outside the frosted glass door, the sounds of laughter, new and unburdened, filtered through. She picked up her old folder, the first one she'd carried into a Hale boardroom 40 years ago. Yellowed tabs, frayed corners. Inside, handwritten site notes, Cost margins, employee birthdays scribbled in the margins. A voice cut through her reflection. "Excuse me." A young woman stood in the doorway, notebook clutched to her chest, hair pulled back in a bun, oversized blazer too big for her frame. She couldn't have been older than 22. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, stepping in.
I am Claire.
"I just started as the foundation intern. I was wondering if," she hesitated, eyes flicking to Lorraine's folder, "if you ever take on ments?" Lorraine looked her over. Not her outfit, not her resume. Her eyes steady and intent. "You know how to build something that lasts?" Lorraine asked.
Claire blinked.
"I'm hoping to learn." Lorraine stood slowly, closed her folder, and nodded. "Then come back Monday," she said. "Bring boots." Claire smiled, a little unsure. "Boots." Lorraine's voice was quiet, but sure. "The legacy starts outside the boardroom." The wind smelled like sawdust and jasmine. Lorraine stood at the edge of the original Hale site, the old bungalow-style office they'd poured their first foundation under nearly 50 years ago. The air here had a quiet weight to it, thick with the stories of calloused hands, clipped blueprints, and lunch breaks on truck tailgates. She ran her fingers across the stone plaque now embedded in the garden's border. Lorraine Hale, co-founder, builder, survivor. The plaque shimmered slightly in the early light, just enough for her to see her reflection beneath the engraving. Behind her, Amanda and little Ella were kneeling in the grass, gloves muddy, laughter rolling soft and unguarded. Lorraine watched the two of them lean into each other, Amanda brushing hair from Ella's face with the kind of care Lorraine used to wonder if her daughter had ever learned. But she had eventually, and Lorraine had waited long enough to see it. Ella held the sapling between her palms like it was breakable. "Is this where it all started?" she asked. Amanda looked to Lorraine. Lorraine nodded.
Right here, she said.
"Where we had no money, too much ambition, and the good sense not to quit." Ella furrowed her brow. "Was this Grandpa's company?" Lorraine's eyes narrowed slightly. Not cold, just focused.
"He started it," she said.
"But I made sure it survived." They planted the tree together, a Carolina cherry laurel, its roots wrapped in damp burlap, its trunk thin but straight. Amanda held the base while Ella scooped dirt into the hole. Lorraine took the shovel last, pressing her boot firmly on the edge, grounding it in. The soil was damp and rich, the kind of earth that held onto stories. Lorraine let it slide between her fingers as she filled the last gap, tamping it smooth. The garden around them was nothing like it had been. It had grown wild. Flowers now wrapped the edges of the stone pathway, and benches bore carved names of foremen and site leads from the company's earliest days, the names Darren had never bothered to learn, that Calvin hadn't always remembered, but Lorraine had. Every single one. On the far edge stood a tall wrought iron arch, overgrown slightly with climbing roses. A new sign hung from its curve, the Hale Foundation Garden in honor of those who built and bloomed. Ella wandered over to it and touched the metal letters. "Is this yours too?" she asked. Lorraine looked out across the space, the carefully placed bricks, the raised garden beds donated by volunteers, the plaque with her name finally written in full. She exhaled through her nose, a smile curled into the corner of her mouth.
"No," she said.
"This belongs to whoever protects it next." They sat together on the bench beneath the cedar tree Calvin had planted when Amanda was born. It leaned slightly now, age curling its spine, but it still stood like her. Amanda reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. "They sent the final deed transfer," she said. "Your name, sole founder, property rights fully restored, foundation charter updated." Lorraine didn't reach for the papers. "I know," she said, staring straight ahead. "I don't need to hold it to believe it." Amanda nodded, understanding that this wasn't about ink or notarizations. It was about roots and what they'd outlasted. Ella leaned against her great-grandmother's arm. "Are you going to put more names on that plaque one day?" Lorraine smiled. "If they earn it, can I?" Lorraine looked down at her, those bright, curious eyes already sharper than Darren's had ever been. "You just helped plant a tree with 3 generations of Hales." "That's a good start," Ella beamed. The sun had risen higher now, washing the site in gold. Bees floated lazily between clusters of lavender. The scent of honeysuckle drifted in on a warm breeze. Lorraine stood again slowly, her bones cracking in protest, but they held. She took one last look at the site. There were no framed photos of Darren here. No echoes of his arrogance. No trace of the legacy he tried to hijack. He hadn't just been removed. He had been forgotten.